were all set to be at the Hilton in Sydney right now, but unfortunately that's not possible. As soon as it's safe to travel, we'll be on the first flight over there, down there.
When life throws a curveball at you, it's how you react that matters. Canceling the conference was never an option. Not for us and not for you. Thank you so much for attending.
If you have any questions, we are available on Slack. We also have a WebEx meeting where you can meet us in person at the Info Booth channel.
To all of our speakers waiting to present to you from their homes, thank you so much for speaking.
To all our fantastic partners, thanks for sticking with us through this. You rock. These are awesome companies. Special thanks to our exhibitors. You'll find them at our virtual expo. Make sure you visit them. There are some amazing prizes to be won. We'll do live prize draws during every lunch break.
Thanks to the Agenda Committee for putting together a fantastic agenda. You did a great job.
So wherever you are in the world, we hope you enjoyed the show.
Anything you want to add to this, Susan?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Australia. Welcome. That is an interesting word, isn't it? Welcome, welcome, välkommen, bienvenue, bienvenut. And they all mean the same thing. They all have the same root. They are all words that mean a sense of joy at arriving somewhere. So me welcoming all of you to Sydney for NDC Sydney 2020, it kind of doesn't really add up. Because for starters, most of you are in Australia, and I'm not, so I can't really welcome you to a place where you already are, and I'm not there. And also, no one's really arrived anywhere. Most of us have just kind of, sat down at a desk or put the TV on, and we've got this up watching on a nice big screen. And we're tuned in, and we are experiencing the joy of a remote online conference. And, it is fascinating what has happened and the way that we've adapted over the last sort of 6, 7, 8 months of this year. We have over the next 3 days some of the most amazing speakers, some of the best content, panel discussions, workshops, all kinds of things happening. And, all of the people who have made that happen, they've adapted. They've turned physical talks into virtual talks. They've turned physical expo booths into virtual online presence. We got people setting up cameras and lights and streams and all kinds of things. So wherever you are and however you're connected to this, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're able to join us. It's great to be a part of it, because what a hell of a year it has been, hasn't it? We are literally living through a revolution in digital communications and workplace culture, all kinds of things. The world is changing permanently around us over the course of 2020. And, back in London, I was speaking at NDC, back in January, I was speaking at NDC London. And if you said to me, you're going to be doing the keynote for Sydney, I'd have gone, woohoo! And if you said, you're going to be doing it in your house to a camera, I'd have been, what? No, surely not. Why would anyone do that? But the world has thrown us a massive curveball, and we have adapted, And it's remarkable the number of companies that for years have been like, yeah, people can't work from home. And now suddenly they're like, well, maybe, I guess it would be all right under the circumstances. And it's been a massive challenge. I've seen several people say, what's happening here? This is not remote working. This is not working from home. You are stuck remote. You are stuck at home, and you are trying to work. You are trying to get things done. And, a lot of our ability to run events like this, to take events like NDC and put them online, is because of you, because of people, because people are awesome, and they are flexible, and they are adaptable. So let's have the first massive round of applause of NDC Sydney 2020 for you, for being awesome and allowing us. Come on, I can't hear you. And it's a big world, so you're going to have to clap even louder than that. But the technology has kind of helped, right? Like, all of us who upgraded our broadband so that we could watch Netflix, suddenly it's like, oh, we can do conferences over that. And those laptops that we bought because they were so shiny in the Apple Store, and now it's like, actually, this has got a pretty good camera that we can use to do remote talks. And that headset that you got for playing Warcraft, you're like, I can actually do my job and go to meetings using this. The technology has been a huge enabler. And this pandemic, the 2020 thing, has happened at a point in history where most of us have enough technology and infrastructure at home that we do have some options. Things did not just, grind to a halt. Now, it's interesting to compare, we talk about last year was normal and this year is weird, and when things go back to normal and the new normal. But this is just, another cycle in a ongoing process of evolution about the way we communicate. Even just looking at the conference industry, when I go back on the road again, and it will happen at some point in, I hope, the not too distant future, you think back to the conferences that you went to last year or the first part of this year, and it's all, HDMI and Wi-Fi and really, really slick technology. But when I go back to doing talks, I'm packing one of these. You know why? Because there's places everywhere that still all they've got is VGA. And if you can't plug into VGA, you can't do it. And if we go back in history a little bit further, you ever wonder why the things in a PowerPoint file are called slides? Well, my first kind of proper IT job I ever had, I was taking Harvard Graphics and PowerPoint 97, and I'd save the files and I'd use ISDN to send them to a bureau who would send a bike round the corner later the same day with these slides, actual 35mm slides with PowerPoint slides on them, because we hadn't invented digital projectors yet. We have been changing constantly, since we started inventing this whole idea of let's stand up and talk to people and tell them what we do. We've kept evolving, we've kept changing. Technology keeps changing, and that's what I want to talk to you about today, is the development of communication technology and the way, how did we get to where we were, and then how did we get from where we were last year to where we are now, and where are we going to end up? What does the future hold for communications technology and humankind? So just a kind of, nice narrow scope there to kick us off. But communication is amazing. Communication is a superpower. From the second we are born, we are figuring out how to use communication to make sense of the world around us. We learn to talk. We learn to look at pictures and use those to make sense of things we haven't seen for real, but we've seen pictures of them. We can imagine what they look like. We learn to draw when we're kids. We communicate our understanding of the world around us by drawing with crayons and stuff. We learn to read. We learn to write, and we unlock this superpower. We unlock the ability to assimilate information that we did not have to learn for ourselves. I did not have to get bitten by a shark to know that they are dangerous. I did not have to, weigh an elephant to find out how much an elephant weighs. All of these facts and things that help us make decisions about the world we live in, we can pick that stuff up without having to discover it all for ourselves. And that's amazing. That's what's allowed humankind to achieve some astonishing things. And we're going to start at, I think, a good place to start. We are going to start at the beginning. We are going to start here. This is Iraq, about 5,000 years ago. Or rather, this is what it looks like now. This isn't actually a 5,000-year-old photograph for reasons that will become apparent. Now, we don't know when human beings invented language. There is one massive problem with language. Language doesn't leave any fossils. Language doesn't leave any physical traces. People talk to each other, and, there was nobody around at the time recording it to use in a podcast, so we don't know how long ago human beings started talking to each other. We know that they started using stone tools about 3 million years ago, and then somewhere along the way we learned how to talk, and then 5,000 years ago, there's a bunch of people hanging out in what was Mesopotamia, it's now Iraq, and somebody's about to have a good idea. And they're thinking, this speech and language, this stuff is all very well, but what if we could, make some marks in a piece of clay or something, and then we'll bake it in the oven, and then next time I need to know how many cows my friend Enki has got, I can just look at the clay instead of having to remember stuff all the time. And now, the reason we always think of people as writing on clay is because the clay survived. They almost certainly wrote on papyrus and vellum and all kinds of other things, but the clay survived, and boom, suddenly we had invented writing. Now, the earliest writing systems were predominantly what is called pictographic. If you wanted to say something about 3 cows, to send someone a message, say, Enki wants to send Nishab a message about 3 cows. So Enki sends a message. And, you're looking at it, you're thinking, okay, Enki says 3 cows. What about 3 cows? Like, Are you okay? You buying 3 cows? You selling 3 cows? Because not only are we inventing writing, there is a lot going on in archaeological terms at the moment. Within the space of a few hundred years, we invented writing, we invented tax, we invented debt, we invented, the ideas like sharecropping. We hadn't invented money yet. But this idea of having to keep track of business transactions is almost as old as being able to record things themselves. So there is a huge amount going on. And for the first time in history, we are starting to record and develop concepts like ownership and taxation. And in order to do that, we need to up our game when it comes to how we are writing things. Right. Let's have a quiz. Now, it's a very easy quiz to get everyone, up and thinking on a Wednesday morning or late night for those of us in Europe. I'm going to show you some clues, and the answer to every round here is just the name of a country. So I'm going to show you a clue, and I want you to guess the name of the country. So let's start off. Question 1. It's not a trick question, by the way. It's just, what country is this? That's right, Spain. Okay, how about this one? Guess the country. Yep, that's right. This is the United States of America. How about this one? Some of you might recognize. That's right. This is the great country of Australia, where I welcomed you all to a little moment ago. How about this one? Ice, land, Iceland. A little bit harder. How about, anybody? That's right, Botswana, boat, swan. Now, how about this? Anybody out there who can read this? Because if I said this to you out loud, you would know what it was. It is Canada. A couple of people I can see in the chat here have got that right. Folks watching on WebEx, I think you've got about a 5-second advantage over the folks watching on YouTube, by the way. So use your advantage with great responsibility. How about this one? Now, this one's interesting. Because 30 years ago, this didn't mean anything to anybody because this did not exist. But when, South Africa had the fall of apartheid and the new Republic of South Africa in the 1990s, this became the flag of South Africa. Yes, that's absolutely right. Now, have a look at these 4. We got this one, we got this one, we got this one, we got this one. Last one probably gives the game away here. Now, these all say the same thing. They mean the same thing, but they also stand for the same sound, the same sequence of noises. This is Canada. The top one is in Japanese. Next one is in Hangul, which is Korean. Third one is in Cyrillic, which is used for Russian and Ukrainian. And the fourth one is Canada, written in, the English that most of us read and write and speak. Now, if you look at the top one there and you can't read it, you don't know what it says, but if someone reads it out to you, Canada, you know which country it is. If you take a look at this for a second, now this is not a country, but most people who can read the English alphabet will have a look at this and they will go, okay, it's a vertaheppo, I guess. And it is a vertaheppo. It is the Finnish word for hippopotamus. Now, Finnish is a phonetic language. The letters are always pronounced the same. So if you know how to read the letters of the Finnish alphabet, you can read Finnish and you'll get all the pronunciations pretty close to right. There's a bit of a knack to it. But most people can read Finnish even if they don't understand what they are reading. Now then, let's introduce this word here. And there's a difference of opinion about this word, because this is Greg the Giggly Goose. And Greg the Giggly Goose thinks that these are called GIF files, whereas Greg's friend Georgia, the ginger giraffe, says that these are called GIF files. And their friend Lee, the Gnostic Nu, thinks the letter G is completely silent, and so Lee goes around talking about if files, and no one's entirely sure what Lee is going on about. This is because English has very low what is called phonic orthography. In English, the same shape, the same letter, could be pronounced in several different ways. Is this a J, as in JavaScript? Or is it a ya, as in Junta or Jägermeister? Or maybe it's a ha, as in jalapeno or hallelujah. Ya, as in hallelujah. Ha, as in jalapeno. Because, English spelling is a mess. Now, any of you out there who've ever learned English as a second language will have had points where you look at English spelling and you're thinking, this is a joke. My friends are winding me up. This is just there is no way this is real. Because English spelling is, well, I take it you already know of tough and thou and cough and dough. Others stumble, but not you, on hiccup, thorough, slough and through. Well done, and now you wish perhaps to learn of less familiar traps. Beware of herd, a dreadful word that looks like beard and sounds like bird. And dead is said like bed, not bead. For goodness sake, don't call it deed. Watch out for meat and great and threat. They rhyme with sweet and straight and debt. And English is a car crash of pronunciations and letters that mean different things and different sounds in different contexts, and it is incredibly difficult. And one of the things that I'm profoundly grateful for as an international speaker, somebody who gets to travel to a lot of places and meet a lot of people, is that most of the places I go, people speak English. English is the kind of, international language of the technology community, and I'm really grateful for that because that's the language I speak. So I get to have conversations with people that are, very much biased in my direction. But I always try and make a little bit of an effort to at least pick up a couple of words. Now, being British English, when I go to somewhere like Norway, for instance, I see a word like this, and I look at it, and I think I recognize it, but it's got these funny little, shapes on it that we don't have where I come from, so I just ignore them. And, I go out and I ask someone if they have a half-owner. And, of course, everybody roars with laughter because that is not how you pronounce a half-owner, I think. One of the Norwegians can pick me up on that. And, it's just funny. I get the pronunciation wrong. Everyone laughs. I get a round of drinks, which in Norway will go a long way towards, restoring your status with the locals. And we get on and we talk in perfect English. But within the last couple of decades, things have started to get really complicated because, as you probably noticed, there's a lot of computers about. And we are increasingly trusting computers to make important decisions around things like who can get a bank account and who can get a plane ticket and who can get a visa and all these kinds of things. And things start going wrong because the underlying technology can't keep up. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. This is Magnus Martinsson. Actually, this is not Magnus Martinsson. This is Magnus Mortonsson, because Magnus is from Sweden, and the second letter in his name is this letter in the Swedish alphabet, O, which is like an A with a little circle on the top. And a couple of years ago, Magnus was traveling to the US for a conference, and Magnus has a Swedish passport which says his name is Magnus Mortonsson. And the rules of Swedish orthography say that if you have to turn his name into ASCII to put it at this little strip at the bottom of the passport, the O becomes AA, double A. But the people who booked Magnus' airline ticket, they didn't get that memo because they didn't work for the Swedish government. They're an American airline. They just went, take the circle off, it's going to be fine. So he ends up with this and tries to enter the United States with a passport that does not match the exact spelling of the name on his plane ticket. Now, the American border authorities are famously knowledgeable and lenient. No. He had to answer some fairly complicated questions before they'd let him go on his way. But, this is a big deal. Magnus is a, well-dressed, articulate white guy going to speak at a software conference. You can see how that same situation could end up very, very badly for somebody else just because of our assumptions around language and culture and alphabets and those kinds of things. Now, it gets even weirder. There is a town in Denmark, the second city actually in Denmark, called Aarhus. And Aarhus was officially spelled Aarhus from 1948 until 2011. And in 1948, Denmark decided that they wanted to be less German and more Scandinavian, for reasons you can probably work out. So they added 3 new letters to the Danish alphabet. They put them at the end, and they said, all these old Danish-sounding words, we're now going to spell them with the letters of the new alphabet. So Aarhus became Aarhus. Then, in 2011. Now, this is Danish alphabetical order because O appears at the end. A is at the beginning and O is at the end. Then in 2011, the people of Aarhus voted to change the spelling of the city back, but not to put it back at the beginning of the alphabet. So this list is now in alphabetical order in Denmark and Norway. And people from Denmark and Norway look at it and say, well, of course it is. Aachen is A and Aarhus is O. They're obviously different letters of the alphabet. Now, they're not. You know, there's nothing in this data set that will allow you to get that right. That's just how it is. It's culture and history showing up in things like the order of the files in a Norwegian installation of Windows 10. Now, it gets even weirder, because one of the things that you discover as you explore and play around with language and communication is it's easy to think that the language you grew up with is obviously the best one and all the others are kind of inferior because they're difficult. And everyone thinks this, whatever language you grew up with. But there are some languages that get things right that you suddenly realize, hang on, where I'm from, we don't know how to do that. There is a familiar thing. You walk into a bar in London and a bartender says, yeah, what'll it be? And you say, the usual. And in the last couple of years, people in London have started to shorten the usual into the huge. Now, how do you spell huge in British English or Commonwealth English? Is it the use? No, the duge, the huge, yeah. I'll have a pint of lager, please, John. You can't do it. We can't spell huge in English. Now, if John spoke Russian, he could walk into the bar and the bartender would say, "Chotu budeš pit, what do you want to drink?" And he could say, now this is the Russian letter U. It is always pronounced U. And this is the Russian letter Z, which is always pronounced Z. So you can say huge. And the bartender, хорошо, молоко. Yes, here you go, glass of milk. Now, you can't say the usual in Russian, because one, Russian does not, there is no Russian word for the. It doesn't have the definitive article. It doesn't exist. And also, it doesn't have the th sound. So, you know, Heathrow Airport is Chytru in Russian. So maybe we just need to mix them up. We'll take all the best bits of all the languages around the world, and there we go. The huge, please. Complete, beautiful, unambiguous. You think it's going to catch on? I don't know, but it's a nice idea to play around with, you know? Now, let's go back to the elements of our country quiz. We had, the United States of America and we had Australia, and these representations, these are not letters in any alphabet. These are pictographic representations. If you've been to New York City and you've seen the Statue of Liberty and you see this picture, you're like, I remember that. And if you've ever seen Australia from very, very high up in the air, high enough to kind of see the outline of the continent, you'll be like, I recognize that. I know which one that is. There's this lovely bit in one of Bill Bryson's books where he says, Uluru, what used to be Ayers Rock, basically it's a planetary landmark. Like third rock from the sun, big round thing with a bump in the middle, I'll meet you there. And people from other galaxies could get directions with that. But Australia, this shape, you'd recognize it, because that's what shape it is. Whereas this, as I said, prior to 1994, this didn't mean anything because nobody had been taught what it meant. This is ideographic. We've just been taught to associate this image with the idea of the Republic of South Africa, with that country. Now, one of the most interesting ideographic symbols is this one. We all know what this means. Everyone knows what this means because it's in all the comic books we have growing up. Pretty much wherever you come from in the world, you've seen this in comic books when you were a kid. But this isn't a picture of anything, No human being has ever had a conversation by getting a white shape to appear up above their head and words appearing in it. That's just not a thing that happens, but we know what it means. And almost all of you are probably looking at one of these. You have one of these on your screen right now because all of the online collaboration and video and YouTube and everything, they all have chat. And everyone knows that chat is a bubble with an arrow pointing out. And so the designers get fancier and fancier because they know you're going to look for it. And you're going to dig, you're going to hunt, and you're going to try and find something that looks like this. So if we want to visually communicate the idea of communication, there's 4 ways we can do it. There's pictographic. We can draw a picture that looks like people talking. There is what we call phonographic. Now, if you speak English, this says chat. If you speak French, it says chat, but it doesn't mean conversation. It means a cat. If you speak Russian, this says snat, and it doesn't mean anything. We have ideographic communication, which is where we've just learned to see a certain shape as meaning a certain thing, and we have what is called logographic communication. Now, we don't really have logographic communication in the West, in Europe and the United States and the Commonwealth and stuff, because we grew up with alphabetic languages. But logographic communication, this symbol is the Chinese word, I believe it's pronounced tan. It means chat. But the difference between this and the kind of chat symbol, that thing on the left, the two bubbles, you could be like chat, speech, conversation. It's a mapping from a symbol to an idea that doesn't have a fixed route through spoken language to get there. Tan always means tan. It means that's it. This symbol stands for that word. Now, modern software user interfaces are a spectacular mashup of different communication styles. Let's have a look at the Word 2003 toolbar. Now, when Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office was kind of in its first sort of incarnation, first generation, if you like, they were trying very hard to sell software to people who'd never used it before. And so they favored a very pictographic style of representation. The idea is, you're in Word and you want a new document. Oh, look at that. It's a picture of a blank piece of white paper. I'm going to click that. And we know it's paper because the edge is folded over, just like real paper. And then next to it, there is a yellow cardboard file, which is where we all keep our Word documents, right, in a yellow file. And then next to that is one of these, a blue floppy disk, because even people who'd never used Word before, they knew that you saved your files onto one of these. Now, what I have never understood about Microsoft Word is how did the files get off the floppy disk and into the yellow cardboard folder so you could open them the following morning? I don't think there was a lot of joined-up thinking going on there. But, these ideas prevailed. This idea of, folders and attachments and all that kind of stuff. And, some of these things, we look at the most recent version of Word, the user interface, that floppy disk icon has persisted, but it's not a picture of a floppy disk anymore. Now it's just the save icon. Because most people, or many people today, have never seen a physical floppy disk. This is the story of the kid who finds one of these and comes running downstairs saying, Mummy, why did you 3D print the save button? Because they've never seen one. And so that has gone from being a pictogram to being an ideogram in a generation without changing. It's the same shape. It means the same thing, but now it gets there via a different route. And then underneath that, we've got the copy and paste and cut. And if you look closely, and maybe you've never noticed this before, it's a little pair of scissors, and it's a little pair of documents, and it's a little paste brush. And have any of you ever made a document by cutting something up with scissors, photocopying it, and then pasting it using a brush and a paste brush? Last time I did this talk, everyone just said in the chat, only for doing ransom notes, which makes me wonder about some of the company we're attracting here in our industry. And then we move sideways and we get into this bewildering mishmash of ideas because, human language is built on metaphor. And human beings, because we live on a planet with gravity, we have this idea that, up is big, is heavy, is loud, and small is down, is quiet, is, so we talk about blowing up the size of a font and shrinking things down and all these kinds of ideas. And we've got pouring paint into bounded things and little pictures of table cells. And then we have this button which just says normal. And a couple of nights ago, I was sat here, I was putting together some ideas for this talk. I was thinking, I'm fed up. I'm bored of this whole coronavirus and lockdowns and not being able to travel. I want everything to go back to how it was. So I clicked normal. I was like, come on, Word, make it normal. And you know what happened? My bullet points disappeared. Because normal in Word doesn't mean what normal means in lots of different contexts. Because context is really, really important when it comes to communication. What does this mean? Anyone know? Anyone recognize this? Because, hey, red circle, it could mean any number of things. Well, let's give it a little bit of context. If we take that and we put it on a white rectangle, now suddenly, oh yeah, I know that one. That's the flag of Japan. We take the same red circle and we put it on a button like that, and we put some other buttons next to it. Now it means record. And there's actually a lot going on here. Record is red. Why is it red? Because record is a destructive operation when you're working with magnetic tape. And in the West, we associate red with danger. Whereas in China, red doesn't mean danger, it means good luck, it means good fortune. So that idea, hey, press the lucky button and suddenly you've lost your recordings. Did that happen? I'm sure it must have happened more than once. And next to it, we've got the play button, which is green, because green means go. And if you're one of the 1 in 12 men or 1 in 200 women who is red-green colorblind, it doesn't matter, because the record is a circle and the other one is an arrowhead that's pointing. And we read from left to right, and so left to right means left to right. I can never know which way the camera's going. That direction, play direction, that means playback. It means go. And that is so prevalent. If you go onto YouTube, and you change the language to Hebrew. Now, Hebrew reads right to left. Everything goes the other way around. All of the icons, the adverts, everything on YouTube gets flipped, but the playback button does not change direction. It still points the same way, because that idea has become so ingrained in the way we think about technology and stuff. And, context is vital to making sense of communication, particularly when, as software developers, we find ourselves working with overlapping concepts. So we imagine we have some software for managing our conferences, and we go in there one day and we're looking at the properties of the NDC Sydney 2020, and we're like, all right, that's cool, 12th to 16th, yeah, 87 speakers. Yeah, all right, and we don't want to make any changes, so we click on cancel. What does cancel mean in the context of conferences in 2020? Does it mean dismiss this dialogue, no further changes? Or does it mean, yep, we are canceling the conference, refund all the sponsors, give everyone their tickets back, we're terribly sorry, Because now you'd think this would be a stupid mistake that nobody would ever make for real. It looks like WinForms in the question in the chat, because that was the best user interface paradigm ever, and I will argue with anyone who says it wasn't. I was working a couple of years ago on a chat integration system that does pre-authorizations for credit cards. Someone gives you a number, they say you can take a couple of, $1,000 off this card, and you go in to have a look at the record, and you're like, yeah, all right, no, I don't want to make any changes. You click cancel. Now, cancel to software developers, particularly those of us who grew up on WinForms, it means, yeah, no, thank you, I don't want to be here. Cancel to bankers means give away the authorization. We don't want the money. Cancel the whole thing and put it back. And more than once, one of our team clicked the cancel button on this form thinking it was dismissing a dialogue, and they ended up canceling a transaction. And context is a big deal. Context, we use phrases all the time that are meaningless, except they make sense to us because of the context in which they're applied. You ever been working late and, your partner's like, you're going to be home? You're like, no, I'm going to stay late at the office. I got lots of bugs to squash. Imagine that if they didn't know that a bug is a software defect and squashing it is when we fix the problems. And the best thing about context and communication in software is that Microsoft Excel, the British government's favorite database and a beloved tool of financiers and list makers all over the planet, has a dialog box in it with a feature called Pi Explosion. And in Excel, you can turn your pi up to 100% explosion. That will never be not funny. Every time I see that, I just think, whoever wrote this, either they were so in the zone that didn't even realize it, or they knew. Now, all of this written, visual communication stuff we've been talking about, it's a way of sending messages through time. It's a way of preserving information now so we can look back at it later. Our society, from the Bible to Beowulf, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Declaration of Independence, our society has been shaped by messages being sent from the past to the future, saying, hey, this is what we think. We're going to put this, write it down so people can refer back to it. Sending messages across time is easy. In one direction, in the other direction, a little more difficult. But sending messages across space. What if you need to send a message to somebody who's not there where you are right now, somebody in another town, another continent? Well, turns out we've also been able to do that for thousands of years, as long as you know what that message means.
Great. And Rohan will answer. Muster the Rohirrim.
That's some documentary footage from our location scouting for NDC New Zealand, which we're going to do next year. That's from the third Lord of the Rings movie. It's one of my favorite scenes ever, of any film ever. And, you know, it is this idea of using fires and light to send a signal a huge distance. You know, if you're out at sea and you see a bright light, it means one thing. It means stay away. There are dangerous rocks near here. Now, you know, that scene, the signal fires of Gondor mean, you know, Gondor calls for aid. We need help. One bit of information. Does Gondor call for aid? Yes or no? And it says yes, and the Rohirrim ride to war. Now, I've worked with people who had a briefing document, a functional spec, a kickoff meeting, a planning meeting, and a sprint zero, and they still didn't know what to do next. Imagine riding to war on one bit of information. Now, when you know that's what it means, when the context is that rich, you can use fires and mirrors and bells and horns to send signals across huge distances. But, you know, to really communicate, we need a way to send any message. You know, why did you light the fires? Oh, we wanted them to bring home some milk. Oh, no, we thought you meant right to war. You know, we need a little bit more context. Now, for a long time, the speed of communication was limited to how fast human beings could travel. 490 BC, a messenger arrives in the city of Athens with important news. The Greeks had defeated the Persians. He delivered his message, and then he fell down and died of exhaustion. And he has sprinted the whole way from the town where the battle took place to Athens to deliver this as quickly as possible. His name was Phidippides. The town that he had run from was called Marathon. Now, in the 1860s, in the United States, there was a service called the Pony Express that reckoned it could get a message across the US in less than 10 days. Now, you know, that may not sound like a big deal. In 1841, President William Henry Harrison died in Washington, and they didn't find out about it in Los Angeles for nearly 3 months. So getting a message across the US in 10 days, yeah, you know, pretty neat idea. Mail arrived by steamboat, and then they basically relayed it on horses. The horse riders they had to weigh less than 57 kilos. They were allowed a gun and a flask of water and the backpack, la mochila it was called, which contained all the letters and everything. And they had this continuous chain of horses and riders and fueling stations right across the United States. And this did brilliantly well. You know, it was a fantastic example of a tech startup. They had a genuinely innovative, disruptive solution. They had a completely unsustainable funding model, and they were wiped out overnight when someone had a better idea. Hey, we're going to send messages. You know, horses are fast, but what if we could send them on electrons? Now, humans have known about electricity for pretty much all of recorded history. 2,750, so about 200 years after we invented writing, people recorded getting shocked by electric fish, electric eels, and those kinds of things. And the Arabic word barq it means lightning, but it's also used to describe electric rays. So even, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, it's possible people had already drawn the association between electric shocks and lightning and those kinds of things. Now, this is one of the most recognizable symbols anywhere. It's the stylized lightning bolt. It means danger, electricity here. The first electrical communication system was this, used in England in the 1830s. It's a thing called a Cook and Wheatstone telegraph system, and had a whole bunch of actually early startup ideas. So one of them was that the engineer who built it wanted to open source all the plans, and the business backer wanted to keep everything secret. One was that the engineer who built it thought it should only use 2 wires because that would make it more efficient and easier to maintain, and the business people said it had to use 5 wires because you had to be able to read it with no training. Now, the way that you read one of these things, you'd connect these 5 wires, you connect 2 of them into a loop, 1 positive, 1 negative, send a signal back, and that would deflect 2 of these needles, and then you could read off which letter those 2 needles pointed at, and that gave you just enough of an address space to send a message in English. It's the first text encoding system ever used. You think 7-bit ASCII is weird and archaic? This was a 5-symbol trinary encoding system. 5 symbols, they could be neutral, positive, or negative. Now, Cook and Wheatstone, their encoding system broke down all the time because 5 wires fail 5 times more often than 1 wire, because wire is vulnerable and stuff. The system that eventually was established and took over the world was this, Morse code. If anyone knows what that message says, drop a message in the chat. I'll send you some special Rockstar transparent PNGs at the end. Now, Morse code was dominant for a century. 1865, there was a conference, technology conference in Paris, that said Morse code is the international language of telegraph systems. And ASCII, which kind of eventually replaced it, came along almost 100 years later, 1963. Now, this is the world around about the 1850s. And we're going to do a very simplified map of the world because we're going to break it down into the bits of the world that were hot, bits that were cold, bits that were wet, and bits that had a telegraph system. And the bits with the telegraph systems are the bits where most of the people had most of the money. And so the obvious question is, could we connect those bits together? Could we run a cable across the Atlantic Ocean? And this is where we get to the really cool part, because we're going to do a startup, and you're all going to come in with me. This is going to be our little project. And here's our business plan. 1855, we're going to run a telegraph cable across the Atlantic Ocean. There's a couple of things going to make this tricky. One, the telegraph hasn't been invented yet, which is good, because it means we can be first. But it means if one of our crew in Ireland needs to talk to one of our crew in Newfoundland, we can't send them a telegram or email them, or we have to get on a boat and cross the Atlantic and go, hey, left a bit, and then come back and, We're going to be spending a lot of time on boats. Speaking of boats, we are going to need to borrow a ship because this is the kind of cable we're talking about. We're talking about 6,000 kilometers of this kind of cable that no one's ever really worked with before in these kinds of quantities. This stuff, we're going to take the purest copper we can find. We're going to spin it into a thing about 2 millimeters in diameter. Now, the problem with the Atlantic Ocean is it's a bit deep, and it's a bit wet, and it's a bit salty, and electricity and salt and water and pressure don't really work terribly well together. Now, rubber hasn't been invented. We don't get synthetic rubber for about another 50 years, but there is a natural substance that will do the job. It's from the bark of a tree. It's a thing called gutta percha. And it's a natural rubber that is uncannily good for making submarine cables because it's a very good insulator, but when it gets cold and compressed, it gets even better. So it actually gets better at insulating when we put it across the bottom of the sea. So we are going to take a couple of 1,000 kilometers of this stuff, and we are going to try and run it across the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah? What could possibly go wrong? So we get 2 ships. We get the HMS Agamemnon and the USS Niagara with these huge wooden spools of cable on them. 300 miles of cable on each spool. About 400 miles out to sea, cable snapped. Game over. Spent a few days trying to recover it. Didn't come back up off the bottom of the ocean. Like, right, let's go home for the winter. We'll figure out what we did wrong. We'll improve all our equipment. We'll improve our machinery. We'll go back. Next year, we got a much better plan. Instead of trying to sail out of Valentia in Ireland, we're going to start in the middle of the ocean. And we are going to sail in opposite directions, paying cable out as we go, and we are just going to keep pinging each other backwards and forwards. 3 days in, it failed. We don't know why. The cable was fine at both ends, but something down on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean snagged that cable, and we don't know. So we regrouped in the middle, and we ran the cable out again, and this time it worked. And in 1858, the first transatlantic telegraph message was sent from Queen Victoria to President James Buchanan. And it signaled the dawn of the era of transatlantic telecommunication, which lasted 3 weeks, because that's when this guy came along. Now, I told you this was a startup. What happened is as soon as we got the product to market, and it worked, the engineers were all fired, and the business people took over. And this is Wildman Whitehouse, who was the business manager of the first submarine telegraph project. And he was convinced that he could get more telegrams, and therefore more money, if he increased the voltage. He cranked it up to 2,000 volts and burned it out, and that was it. After 3 weeks, the first age of transatlantic telegraphy was over. He was fired. The share prices crashed. That was it. Game over for a while. Now, we tried again. 8 years later, They tried again. Better equipment, more experience, and a bigger ship. This was Isambard Kingdom Brunel's Great Eastern. It's a giant iron steamship. This ship laid nearly 100,000 kilometers of undersea telegraph cable. Today, there's something like 1 million kilometers of this cable. Now, one of these, I just want to talk to you about one of these here. This is the Southern Cross Cable. Connects the Pacific coast of the United States, goes across the Pacific, where connects with New Zealand, connects with Sydney, Australia. Does anyone want to see a live demo of the Southern Cross Cable? Hi! Because for many of you watching this right now, every word that I say is streaming through that cable across the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and making landfall at Sydney. Now, this cable has a capacity of 10 terabits per second. It's about 10 years old. They are running another one. Australian internet upgrade imminent, end of next year, or end of 2022. The Southern Cross Next cable is going to take that 10 terabits up to 72 terabits. And there are faster cables still. They just opened one. If any of you are watching this in the US, you are watching this through the Maria cable, which runs from Bilbao in Spain across to the coast of the United States, to San Juan. And then the Brusa cable runs from there down to South America. And, this network of cable is absolutely phenomenal. These things, so Maria carries 160 terabits a second. There's 8 fiber pairs in that. 2 of them, I think, are owned by Microsoft. 2 are owned by Facebook. The others are owned by Google, but they've just leased one of them to Amazon. So those are the kind of players who are putting the money into wire the planet to get to that point. Aaron, it is 10 terabits, but it's shared between every single person in Australia who is currently looking at banner adverts they didn't want on a website they never signed up for. That's where all the bandwidth is going. Now, we are talking about these phenomenal engineering feats. Here's a cross-section of one of those transatlantic cables. You can see that the copper armoring and the fiber pairs. But, these cables get knocked out. They get damaged by earthquakes. They get torn through by shipping anchors. On at least one occasion, one of them was bitten through by a shark. And if several of those cables are knocked out, entire countries can be disconnected from the internet for days at a time. The time it takes to get a ship out onto the bottom of the ocean and fix it up. And this is why we are laying new cable almost as fast as we can pay for it, because our appetite for bandwidth is insatiable. Because with enough bandwidth, it turns out we can do just about anything. We can hold online conferences. We can do online meetings. We can share movies and art and music. And, perhaps the most important thing in all of this is we can show the world what life is like for us where we are. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in the 80s when, everyone, it seemed to me, and maybe I was reading a particular kind of books, everyone was going on about aliens and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and all these kinds of things. And people, they wrote books and they commissioned entire TV shows based on like 2 blurry photographs someone had taken of Bigfoot and stuff. And, I used to think, wow, imagine if everyone had a camera all the time. Imagine how much good video we'd have of Bigfoot and aliens and Sasquatch and the Yeti and UFOs and all this kind of stuff. And my childhood dream kind of came true, because everybody does have cameras on them all the time now. But the footage that we are seeing isn't Bigfoot and aliens and stuff. The footage we are seeing is stuff like this. It's police brutality, it's racism, it's misogynism, it's cultural and institutional problems with countries and governments all over the world, stuff that the government and media doesn't necessarily want us to see. The most recent one I've seen, this is from about a week ago. This is the queue to vote in Dayton, Ohio for the US presidential election. This is just one line of people who are queuing up all over the United States to start voting in the election that's coming up. And, maybe that is the most valuable thing about all this technology.
That's the end of the line.
End of the line. We can share the reality of our daily lives with other people all over the world. And yeah, I know that there's people who say we got to keep politics out of technology, and there's one case where I definitely agree with you. If we could take away Donald Trump's Twitter account, I absolutely would approve of separating politics and technology. But most of the time, it is not that simple. Because, we as a society, as an industry, we have some problems. We have challenges around inclusion and diversity and race and gender and culture. And there's always going to be people who say, well, just leave that out. We'll just do the tech and, But we can't, because politics and technology have always been... There is a pandemic on right now. If you take the technology away, politics is you at your house shouting at the bin. Technology is how we communicate. Technology is what got us here, you know. People share opinions online. People talk about stuff. And, you know, you ever wonder why that first submarine telegraph cable that failed, why did it take 8 years to run another one? When they ran the first one in 1858, this guy was a lawyer in Illinois. When they ran the second one in 1866, this guy was dead. He'd been assassinated. In the gap in the middle, Abraham Lincoln became the first Republican president of the United States. He started this American Civil War started and ended. The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the abolition of slavery, all that happened in that window. When Europe was cut off, it was a steamship right away. When President Lincoln died, nobody in Europe knew about it until the news arrived on a steamship 12 days later. Now, here is a map of the world, the telegraph network of the world in 1901. Now, those submarine telegraph cables we're talking about, most of them were made in Britain. Now, Britain doesn't have copper mines, and Britain does not have gutta percha trees. But what Britain had in 1901 was an empire. About 20% of the habitable land area of planet Earth was controlled by the British Empire, and a huge part of the foundations of the technology and the infrastructure that we rely on to run the modern internet was originally laid by the British to run their empire more effectively. And you add in the Belgian Empire, the Dutch Empire, the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese. We're talking about a period in history, hundreds of millions of people were the unwilling subjects of European imperialist power. Hey, Australia, we remember. And there are people all over the world who are still paying the price for that. And, you know, perhaps more significantly, there are people who are still profiting from it. Now, when you start researching all of this, you know, details of the history of submarine telegraphy and all of these kinds of things. This talk took a lot of research, lots of dead ends, lots of digging. Yeah, I ended up editing Wikipedia articles because I found the things that said that they were wrong. And you start seeing the same kind of faces coming up over and over and over again. It's been like 150 years, and technology startups are still white guys with stupid beards trying to get rich by doing dumb things with electricity, right? What's changed? And, you know, you can say to yourself, oh, well, no, things are getting a lot better since then. And then you notice things. Like the Twitter algorithm that happened, we all noticed a couple of weeks ago. If you put an image on Twitter with a couple of faces in it, it'll pick one to highlight in the crop. And it seems like it doesn't matter who's in the picture. It will always favor white guys. This is an example of this that I did. These are the two pictures. So Twitter likes Brad better than Jennifer, no matter which way around I tried a whole bunch of these. The one I found astonishing was this one. Bender from Futurama is more facey, according to Twitter's algorithm, than Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Now, how the hell did this happen? You know, how do we get to a point where Twitter, with its billions of users and everything, rolls out an algorithm that consistently finds the white guy when it's trying to crop photographs? And it's a problem. It's a problem of systemic bias in data sets, and it's a problem of systemic bias in the teams that don't notice the problem because they didn't try it on anybody who it didn't work for until it went public, and then the rest of the world goes, hang on a second. Now, we're not going to fix this kind of stuff in one talk, but there's 8 billion people on this planet. And I know, you know, concepts like race and gender, they're very, very fuzzy. But if you took all the people on planet Earth and went, come on, right, anyone who you know, identifies as a white male, white guys, all of you come over here, you get about this much. Something between 10 and 12% of the population of planet Earth. Now, that doesn't look like most tech teams that I've ever worked on. You know, so where is everyone else? How are we going to fix this? Well, we're not going to do it in a conference talk. We're probably not going to be able to do it in a generation, but we got to get started. You know, there's an old proverb that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the second best time is right now. So what can we do differently? Well, I'm going to give you one thing that we can start right away. I've been playing with computers since I was a kid. I built my first PC way back in the mid-90s, and I have spent my entire career talking about masters and slaves, and master-slave configurations, and whitelists, and blacklists, and all this kind of stuff. And that's wrong, you know. It never kind of occurred to me, and somebody said, you know, these words are not actually terribly good words. And the wonderful thing about technology is that it still works if you call it something different. The names are not that important. We can let those go. This is tech. We love new shiny things. We love new naming conventions. Let's embrace one. You know, how about we just decide we're not going to do this anymore? Next time you're setting up a high availability database configuration, primary and secondary will do just fine. We know what those words mean. Firewalls can have allowed lists and blocked lists, or good lists and bad lists, you know, because we need, as an industry, to figure out what these problems are, because we need to be more inclusive. We need more people. We need more opinions. The world we've got is run by the white Beattie descendant man of the white Beattie man who did the submarine telegraph cables, and we're heading in a direction that I sometimes think is not entirely healthy. You know, we started doing some dangerous things. We have monetized attention. Now, pay-per-click, pay-per-view, user growth, these are the things that make money. It's the revenue model that runs the web. And we have algorithms now that are recommending content. If you're watching this on YouTube, when it finishes, it's going to suggest something else that you should watch. And it is not going to suggest that you go outside. And it's not going to suggest that you should, you know, switch the computer off, call your mother, eat a salad. It's going to suggest another video, and another video, and another video. The ideal YouTube, you know, the thing that that algorithm is optimizing for is someone who sits down one day, they start watching videos, and they never stop. They just watch video over and over and over. And the way that you get that kind of behavior out of people is by scaring them. Fear is the most immediate of the human emotional responses because it's controlled by the part of our brains that evolved first, the bit that got us out of the way of the dinosaurs and predators and let us survive long enough for the rest of the brain to start evolving. Fear is why you're already panicking about a spider before your brain goes, no, that's just the stem off a tomato plant. You know, that reaction is that visceral. And, you know, we've been running tech for what? 2 centuries now, and this is where we've ended up. Massive global computer network that makes money by scaring people so that they'll watch more videos. I think it's probably time that we tried something different. And the first step towards doing that is talking to each other. And when we started figuring out how to turn NDC conferences into online events, one of the things we agreed right at the beginning, people need to be able to talk to each other. You know, this event is not just about watching talks and consuming content. It's about conversation. It's about collaboration. And sure, doing stuff online is weird, but we're also getting an insight into each other's lives, seeing into, you know, each other's homes. And at some point, somebody's talk is going to get interrupted by their dog or their cat coming in to see what all the noise is about. And you know, I think that's okay. This is showing us the world the way that it is, not necessarily the world the way that we want it to be. And we can embrace that. We can celebrate everything about it together, work out, you know, we've worked out how to replicate almost everything. We've worked out how to replicate talks and workshops and discussions and panels. And there's one thing, talking about celebration, that we have not quite worked out how to replicate. If you were in NDC Oslo last year, I had the enormous pleasure of being up on stage with a bunch of speakers who are also talented musicians and entertainers. And the NDC, you know, Oslo party and the parties we've done at various conferences, those have been great. They're a vital part of what we do here. And we have tried really hard to figure out, can you do music live and remote? And turns out there's a problem that we can't quite get around, a little thing called the speed of light. Now, light moves pretty fast, about 300 million meters per second in a vacuum. In an undersea fiber optic cable, it gets about 2/3 of that speed. Now, this is me here, and this is my friend Heather, who's an NDC speaker, who's also a fantastic singer. She lives here, Kansas City, Missouri. She is about 28 millilight seconds from where I am. So, for me to play music with her and her to send it back and me hear what she sang and play along with that, we're talking about a round trip of 56 milliseconds plus probably another 20 or 30 encoding overhead on either end. Now, I just want to show you what that much latency does to a piece of music. This is 100 milliseconds. Now, it starts out okay. The first bit is absolutely fine, and it's tight, and it's in the pocket. And wait for it. Ends with beginnings. And here's the latency now. Keeps the planet spinning. You see the way it's not quite right? Look. We've come too far to give up who we are. So now, with that kind of latency, you can't do it. You can't collaborate. We can record things and stack them up and play them back as a playback, but there's no such thing as a transatlantic jam. And it's just not going to happen unless we work out a way around the speed of light. Now, I've been amazed at how well everyone's been able to keep in touch. And earlier this year, I was watching the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. It's the first crewed launch from American soil since the end of the Space Shuttle program. And that launch is only going as far as the International Space Station. That's 400 kilometers up. It's actually not that far. From where I am in London, that's closer than Scotland. But, as we send robots and satellites and people further and further out into the solar system, that whole speed of light thing is going to bite us in a big way. The moon is 1.25 light seconds away. Having a conversation with somebody on the moon is like playing Quake on dial-up with a really, really bad ping. Mars, at its closest approach, is 3 light minutes from Earth. If you try to play Get Lucky with a drummer on Mars, you've finished the guitar before they got the first note, and then they play their bit afterwards. Furthest approach, Mars is 22 light minutes away. And if you want to send a signal to Mars, you have to know where it's going to be in 22 minutes, and you have to point your radio in that direction. Jupiter is 43 light minutes from the Earth. Saturn, about an hour and a half. Neptune is 4 hours. Now, it sounds audacious, but we've done it. We've managed to communicate across greater distances than that. This is Voyager 1. It's launched in 1977. It left our solar system in 2012, and it's still out there. It's got a transmitter with about as much power as a torch bulb. It takes 19 hours for Voyager's transmissions to reach Earth, but we can still hear it broadcasting. In probably another 5 years, the plutonium that runs its generator will finally run out, and it will fall silent, and that'll be the end of Voyager's journey. But let's look even beyond that. It's Proxima Centauri. It's 4.5 light years from Earth, and we've found what might be a habitable planet in orbit around it. Now, maybe one day people will go there. Could we get there? I don't know, Talking about 6 months of lockdown has been bad enough. Imagine 10, 20 years in a spacecraft where, you've watched all the Netflix that you have on board, and if you try to send an email back to Earth, it takes 4 years to get there and 4 years to get an auto-reply saying, sorry, the person you're trying to reach is currently out of the office. But think about this. 200 years ago, human beings waved loved ones goodbye and probably never saw them again as they set sail on ships for a new life. And maybe 200 years from now, again, we will be waving people goodbye and never speaking to them again as they board ships and head off in search of a new life. But right here, right now, the human race is better connected than it has ever been. There's a global pandemic going on, and we can still talk to each other. We can still see each other. We can still work together, collaborate together, create things together. I think that's pretty amazing. I think that's worth celebrating.
For millions of years, mankind lived just like the animals. Then something happened, which unleashed the power of our imagination. We learned to talk. We learned to listen. Speech has allowed the communication of ideas, enabling human beings to work together. To build the impossible. Mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking. And its greatest failures by not talking. It doesn't have to be like this. Our greatest hopes could become reality in the future. With the technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. All we need to do is make sure we keep talking.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Enjoy the next 3 days. I will be drinking strong coffee and staying up all night to see most of it out with you. Take it easy. Thank you for watching. ending online talks is always so weird. It's like, is that it? Oh, are we done?